as you can see, at Centennial, it's an exciting time right now. That is a $60 million listing of just over 7 acres on Las Vegas Boulevard. And it's kind of, I guess I would say, typical of the opportunities in today's marketplace. There's a lot of exciting things going on. Certainly, most of you are with us today to talk a little bit about some of the legislation in California and get an update on that. But also to hear kind of our take and our thoughts on what's going to happen with some of these tax proposals and how that impacts the value of real estate, how that impacts the opportunities that are available to people today, and how it maybe influences where you want to own and some of those things as well. And we'll try to get into as much of that as possible over the next hour. I'm Justin White, managing partner of Centennial Advisors, and I'm joined by Jason Brooks of Buckhalter. Jason regularly joins us to talk about the issues facing investment property owners. And like I said, our agenda today will talk about the important things. We'll start on the legislative side with what's happened for owners as it relates to SB 91 and a couple other things. And then we'll get into the Biden tax proposals and show some slides. We've worked a lot really over the last 2 weeks as the proposals have come out, and it looks like it's something that we're all going to be facing, whether it passes or not. We've done a lot of work and studies for owners that are trying to figure out if this is their last chance to do a 1031 exchange, how much time do they have, number one, and what do the opportunities look like? We've also done some studies for people that are looking at, okay, well, in light of some of the things happening in California, if maybe I've had enough of California and I'm willing to move my estate out of California, are there significant financial benefits of doing so? And how does real estate look in some of these other states? And is it significantly different than maybe it was 20 years ago? And we'll get into a little of that as well. So the first things that we'll talk about, Jason, I think, is go right into SB 91. I know with how much we talk about what's going on with it, that you're involved with a number of different clients in getting the paperwork filed correctly, dealing with tenants that maybe have moved out or left early or whatever. Let's talk about a couple of those things and what you're seeing.
This was the second and final.
So the applications are going well. We're actually getting a lot of progress from people in the applications, and we've actually seen some new things pop up since the last time we called. We spoke. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about the example that we spoke about the first time. There was a property in Los Angeles, right near West Hollywood. We did an application to get everything accepted, and we turned around all the paperwork. And then before our cash payment was supposed to come, which was essentially supposed to be last week, our tenant got an updated request from the city of Los Angeles asking her if she had paid May and if she was planning on paying June. And our tenant told us that they were going to be unable to pay for May and unable to pay for June, but what they had already paid us had covered 25% of both months. So the city of LA is actually they're administering their own program, but they're actually going to pay us for May and June, even before June is completely over. So I thought that was a positive update for landlords to know, is that there are some programs that are actually, while you're in the application process, asking the tenants if they are going to be paying the next 2 months. And if the answer is no, they're actually giving you the money all the way through the end, which was a big question that people had when we originally started doing this.
Yeah, I think the big question was, what were we going to do with April, May, and June?
Right.
Because it wasn't really clear on what would happen. Are you seeing, or have you heard of any of the other administrators of programs, whether it's city, county, or state, doing the same thing?
No, not yet. We've done a lot of applications now across, and I think that the allocation of funds outside of LA is going quickly. I'm not sure that they're accepting new applications at this point. So anybody that's waited, it might be too late. I think the money might be dried up. LA just waited, and then they did a lotto on who got picked. We were fortunate to have one of our tenants, let's just say in this example, get picked. And before they sent out the money, they actually asked us, so that we were ending up getting the whole amount, which unfortunately that means someone else's tenant's not going to be getting money. But for my client, I felt good about it.
In addition to that client, I know that you had talked last time about a couple others that we're trying to get quite a few more applications through just because they're very large owners of buildings. How's it working out for them?
So we've had good success in some fronts, but it's really based on tenant responsiveness. Um, in certain situations, I will need to say that like it's really about client education. So we've actually had in some of our bigger clients that have a few thousand units or more. They actually sent property managers around door to door, like in the late afternoon, early evening, to educate people on why they needed to complete the paperwork because there were a lot of people that didn't want to complete the paperwork or didn't understand it. But once they began to educate them, and we kind of just told them what to say, like, look, this allows us to apply. It doesn't cost you anything. It keeps us from having to chase you in the future for the money, which would affect your credit. People pretty quickly completed the paperwork. We were even getting lucky where people would complete the paperwork on the spot. So.
What are you seeing or hearing as it related to the different income thresholds? I think I certainly had a fair amount of concern that there would be enough money in the program to cover people in that 80% threshold, and certainly very worried about anything beyond that. What are you seeing or hearing? And maybe remind everybody that I think the city of LA is doing it a little differently as it relates to income thresholds.
Right. So the city of LA so the way that the state program is first to people below 50% area median income, then to areas hardest hit by COVID, and then to 80% area median income and below. So what the city of LA did was first, they just assumed that the whole city was hit hard by COVID. So they did a submit your application and then a drawing, like a lottery process on who got selected for the below 50% area median income. And then after that, they were going to go to 80 if there's any funds remaining. I haven't looked recently because we were able to, the way that we did our application, we said that the person lost all or substantially all of their revenue due to COVID, and therefore that they were naturally below 50% area median income, especially for this person, even though prior, if you would have looked at her 2019 returns, she was actually well above the area median income. She was paying, I think, $2,300 or $2,800 a month for a unit. So in order to afford that, you'd have to be well above the AMI.
Let's move on maybe, or any other things as it relates to SB 91 that you want to cover that you're seeing or hearing from your colleagues or clients?
So I would say the cash for keys stuff is really working. We are doing a lot of cash for keys, and it's not as expensive as you think. Please keep that in mind. It's actually, people are pretty reasonable, especially if they didn't turn in now the whole thing is if they didn't turn in their application on time for SB 91 and they were afraid now that they were going to lose, or we're going to have to chase them and then it's going to affect their credit. People are pretty understanding about getting out for a reasonable sum of money. The one thing that you have to realize, though, is that some people think that this pandemic, the tenants think it's going to go on for another year or two. And so they think that they're just going to get to freeload. So those are the people that it's a little bit more difficult. But no, I think the cash for keys is really working well. And just be careful for other eviction moratoriums. For like LA City still has a rent freeze on. So it's not just about SB 91. And by the way, this came up the other day with clients, is the no fault just cause eviction is currently on hold during the eviction moratorium as well. So keep that in mind. People were like, oh, I'm just going to sell the property and the buyer's going to move in. And I'm like, well, technically you can't do that. I mean, you could sell the property, but the buyer can't just force the person out right now, which would be a no fault just cause eviction.
We'll get there in a second, but I wanted to go back to a couple things. I want you to talk a little bit about cash for keys,
okay,
and talk about some examples and what it's costing, and then, but also how you're using people who didn't apply, or how that is, I would say, an advantage or used by an owner to help reduce the cost of what it takes to get somebody out.
Right. So the cash for keys is going fairly well. So for people that we were planning to no fault, just cause evict in July or August. Those folks, we pretty much have just approached them and say, look, we'll give you your security deposit back, no questions asked, and we'll even give you 1 month's rent, or we won't charge you for your last month. Those really work in situations where you don't think that the person actually has the money or will actually be able to pay you back, and you don't think you're going to recover. One of the things, like I said, in talking about with them, especially if they miss the application process for SB 91, is this could affect your credit long term. So if we go in, we show you breach the contract, we get a judgment against you in small claims court, that judgment shows up on your credit or your record for 7 to 10 years. And it will affect your ability to get a car, rent an apartment, anything else. Now, they're saying that it can't be used against you for getting an apartment in the future, but it shows up on your credit report, and the credit score could be used against you in the future for an apartment. So that's the first thing that's pretty helpful. The other ones that are helpful in the cash for keys agreements, though, is, if you do want to just get someone out, is showing them in the future how, you're going to be able to get them out for next to nothing. But they can get out now, they can get back on their feet. We've offered to write people letters of that they were good tenants. We don't mention regarding payments, but then they can take I was a good tenant letter to the next landlord as well, which is helpful. Things I would recommend, though, is maybe requiring them to use some of their money towards the moving expenses and you pay it directly. So keep that in mind too, because then you know that there's an actual mover coming and they don't take your money and walk away with it.
That's a good one. Where'd you come up with that one?
I think I
What
heard
made you think of that? I like it. So I wanted you to backtrack and talk about that, because I think that people expect it so much, or they get threatened with so much, but really you manage the negotiation the right way, you're going to be able to get them out. Let's talk a little bit on the why we're doing cash for keys, why that's the only way to go right now. You mentioned it a second ago, but go into more detail on some of the provisions from 1482 that you could use to evict somebody that you're unable to use today.
Right. So right now, the evictions are limited to really material breaches of your lease, or which would also include creating situations that are harmful or dangerous. If a tenant is not paying due to COVID, if this came up the other day, they have 4 extra people staying at their unit now, but they said it was due to COVID. You can't evict them for that. They brought in 7 pets during COVID. You can't evict them for that. And then the typical AB 1482 no fault just cause eviction items. I would say the 2 biggest ones in that sense are the purchaser of the property intends to move into the unit. That would be option A. Option B is that you're taking the property off of the rental market permanently. And then option C would be a major remodel. So someone came to me and said, oh, we're just going to major remodel a couple of these units, and we're going to tell the person it's going to, they need to get out. And I'm like, you just can't do that right now. And incorrectly going that direction could cost you a lot more in fines as well. So I think they haven't given an exact indication of what it would be, but my guess, based on the way the laws have been written around other things similar, is it's probably a $20,000 fine per door.
All right. So we've got a question right now. Mm-hmm. So we can't evict a tenant in LA even after July 1st?
So technically under SB 91, you can't evict anybody until August 1st for non-payment of rent in July as it sits. Now, that only applies if somebody's been paying 25% of the rent. So let's say they haven't been paying 25% of the rent outside of LA, you could evict them today. Now in LA, it's got its own rules, its own restrictions. The way things are written right now with LA's ordinance is if somebody hasn't paid and you take part of the SB 91 program, you can't evict them for a year after. If you don't take the program money, it's still kind of up in the air how they're going to handle the extension of the eviction moratorium at a local level. Most people think something like what San Diego just passed is what LA is going to do, but probably on a more restrictive basis. And for those of you that don't know what San Diego just passed, San Diego passed a ruling 3-2 by the Board of Supervisors that the eviction moratorium will extend in the county of San Diego for 60 days after the end of the government's stay-at-home order, which is right now scheduled to lift on June 15th. So right now, their eviction moratorium goes until at least August 15th.
So you talked that you can get some people out. Who can you get out?
So you can get people out that have been paying their rent. It's not due to COVID. They're in a breach of a material item in their lease. I wouldn't nitpick the leases right now because the judges aren't going to be on your side. But people that are causing, unsafe living conditions, people that are, harassing or threatening other tenants, people that are causing severe damage to the property, those kind of items, you could evict people for those reasons. But I would argue at this point is even if people are paying their full rent and they've brought a bunch of extra people into the unit or they've got a bunch of extra pets, I don't think you could evict them for that right now because of the way that the state rules are written.
So at one point we talked about that not renewing a lease was a viable option to get somebody out. How's that working out?
So it depends on how it's governed and how the lease is governed. If it's under 15-year-old building, that's fine. If it's over 15 years, depends on how long the tenant and or tenants have been in there, what their 1482 protections might entail them. But most people don't know that subset of 1482 law. So we've had some pretty good success where we just let people know that we're not renewing their lease. If it gets challenged, technically they're allowed to go month to month after somewhere between 13 and 25 months under 1482, depending on the number of tenants and how long they've been there. But, most people think that, it's just a non-renewal. Most people just move out. We haven't had anybody question or challenge it. But if they did, we potentially would just say, no, you can stay month to month. So we have people, our clients now in their leases are making it a material term that the landlord will only extend people on an annual basis so that if somebody refuses to sign a 12-month extension, that we can evict them for breach of the lease instead of for trying to go month to month.
Okay. It's a lot to keep track of and a lot to be on top of to manage your building to its maximum efficiencies. A couple quick questions we've got. Is the Ellis Act allowed by the city now?
So maybe if it was filed before before COVID hit. So we have a client that filed it before COVID. I think he actually officially filed January of 2020. No, sorry, I take that back. He filed middle of the year in 2019. It was supposed to be up middle of the year this year or last year, and they're now starting to get those people out. But I don't think that they're going to currently accept new Ellis Act applications yet, solely because that would be considered a no-fault eviction, that you're taking the property off of the rental market. So the Ellis Act is just a statutory no-fault eviction that's separate of 1482, but it would still be considered no-fault.
All right. Let's go back to or work back to 1482. Can people increase rents now?
Yes. And those of you that waited, congratulations. So last year, your rent increase was up to 5.7%. This year, you can raise rents up to 8.6%. So the CPI came out about a week ago, I think it was, because I called Justin at about 7:00 in the morning when it came out, pretty excited. And yes, 8.6% total. So 3.6% plus 5. Now that doesn't apply to rent controlled properties by cities, but in normal 1482, you get 8.6% this year.
All right. Fantastic. Awesome. Well, let's see if we've got any other questions regarding some of this operational issues around the legislation. I guess we got LA City. When can we evict tenants not paying rent? So that's a loaded question.
That's a great question. If I had a crystal ball that I could look into, I would give you the answer. It's a bit uncertain right now. So if you take the city's SB 91 money, it could be a pretty substantial period of time, so up to maybe a year. But if you don't take the city's money, potentially as early as August 1st, if they've been following certain rules and restrictions. If they haven't, you might be able to now, but it's highly questionable, and I wouldn't risk it because of the bad press and exposure. But if not, the earliest, I would say the earliest is going to be August 1st. Knowing the city of LA, though, I'm guessing end of the year. And it's weird saying this because I think I remember when Justin, we did one of these about a year ago, or maybe a little less, maybe 10 months ago. And I was like, oh, September 1st, everybody, that's your next deadline. And, it'll probably be fine by then. And we're sitting here 8 months later, 9 months later, and we're still in the same position.
Well, I think we're still in the same position in a lot of respects of it, but it certainly all seems to be getting better. Whether it's SB 91 money coming in, or people having money to pay rent, or jobs are reopening, and all these things that we're starting to see. And just as we kind of hit that, it takes us now into the next thing, which is a lot of these tax proposals that everybody is worried about considering, trying to figure out whether it's going to happen, what it means, and how to go about it. And so I think we'll spend the rest of the time today kind of talking about the various points of the tax proposals. And as Jason so rightly said to me in our preparation for this, let's talk about the opportunities. Let's talk about the good things that come about this, the opportunities that people might not have even thought of or explored, with the status quo, but that because we got to talk about these things, maybe make them do something that helps them do better. And so we're going to try to talk about a lot of that. We'll go through kind of the key provisions and some of the important things as it relates to real estate, and then give you some examples. And, I think as it relates to the opportunity, what we're really seeing today, or what this means over the last couple of weeks, is it's the big neon warning sign that really everybody should be looking at their current position, figuring out what's really important to them, and planning the strategy that either gets them to where they want to be or protects everything that they've worked hard for over the years, or as much as they possibly can. So we're in a unique time right now. I think the stat was in the first 2 weeks, or first week after the announcement of the tax proposal, there were 4,000 new properties on the market across the country. We have still record low interest rates. And I'll go into some deal stories and some of the things we've worked on over the last couple of weeks, but it's all people using this to figure out, what should I be doing? How can we do the best? And so what our offer is today is that the first 10 people that are joining us today that reach out to their Centennial advisor just to get a update on where their property stands and what their options might be, we're going to give you a $100 gift card to your favorite restaurant to go enjoy lunch or dinner on us. Maybe the information that the advisor puts together is to take them. But on that, let's start talking about the tax proposals. I mean, it seems like we've got really four things that are the most impactful for commercial real estate owners: capital gains tax, stepped up basis, repeal of the 1031 exchange, and then potentially estate tax changes. We've heard some threats in California over the last couple of years about changing the estate tax as it related to your California tax. But let's start with it. Let's start with the repeal of the 1031. Jason, you got any comments, or would you like me to kind of go through the key points for everybody, and we'll talk about some of the options and what we're seeing?
Why don't you start with the key points, and then we can talk strategies and how we think it impacts and what options are to deal with the solutions.
Okay, so we've kind of heard a little bit about, we heard about it all the way to the back, or to the middle of the campaign season last year, that part of Biden's plan would be to repeal the 1031 and take advantage of the ability to tax the gain that people make on properties, and not provide them the provision to reinvest. The way that we've heard so far is that there would be the end of the 1031 exchange for all gains above 500,000. So the first 500,000 would be, you'd be able to defer that gain if you were to reinvest that 500. Everything above that, there would be taxed at what would become the capital gains tax rate, which we've got some slides right now, if you want to go to the green one, showing what that is currently, which is around 20% for everybody, in addition to what it might be in the state. But if they do increase the capital gains tax, which we'll talk about and show you in a minute, it would be a significant increase. So I want to give everybody a quote. According to the National Law Review, the combined effects of these changes, which would be the repeal of the 1031, would drastically reduce the viability of exchanges for many commercial real estate transactions. Eliminating or reducing 1031 exchange would diminish prices for commercial property, since the tax deferral premium that allowed for a higher ask has been significantly undermined or even eliminated. So that's what we're looking for, or looking at there. There's a lot of questions around when it would go into effect. Do I still have time? How much time do I have? The question that we keep suggesting to our clients is that if you could only do, well, if this was your last chance to do a 1031 exchange, is your current property perfect for what you want to own? Jason, any comments on it? Any suggestions, ideas, things you're seeing or hearing clients do?
Yeah, so I would say that the thing to keep in mind is they generally won't make a law like this retroactive, but we're already in the middle of May, and if it passes, it will become active probably January 1st. And if that's the case, that's your last chance is the next 6.5 months to make this happen. This has been one of the best laws that they've ever created to support financial and wealth growth, real estate expansion for smaller investors as well as larger investors. But I think now is the opportunity to position your portfolio for long-term success. And I would potentially consider positioning the portfolio. I mean, I was born here, I was raised here, I've spent most of my life in California, but I think now is the time to really consider positioning your portfolio outside of the state of California, because while the federal government's program might be drastic or might take away certain opportunities, if it doesn't, the state of California might still take away other opportunities. So I would really look at this as the opportunity to 1031. And just to make things really simple for people, when you 1031 exchange a property, you are exchanging fee title in a piece of real estate for fee title in another piece of real estate. That fee title, you can go from any property type with you or you have fee title to any other property type. There is a common misconception that if you sell a rental house, you have to buy a rental house. You sell apartments, you have to buy apartments. You can sell an office building and buy a hotel. You can sell a house and buy a single tenant triple net drive through Starbucks. You can do any of those. So if you feel like you're in a property that is not able to be exchanged, any property can be exchanged as long as it is an investment property or property held for income generating purposes. But your advisors over at Centennial can advise you on the different options.
You can even buy a piece of land with some trees on it if you're going to farm them.
That is correct.
Where the all started. Jason, I think a couple things or comments to add to that is one, while we are in the middle of May, it's plenty of time. If it were to go into effect January 1st, 2022, yep, getting an exchange done in time is certainly something that can be accomplished. We actually, in just the last week, worked with a California owner, longtime multifamily investor, 40 plus years, broker, at one point probably on 16 properties throughout Southern California, never had owned a net lease property in his life, never had owned anything out of state. And his down leg property sold on Monday, and we had his up leg in Texas, which is an income tax-free state, closed on Wednesday. So he had 2 days in between, and probably start to finish from when we first met him was a little over 8 weeks in getting the whole transaction done. One of the things that, yes, I think doing an exchange now is certainly a viable option for a lot of people, but I think that there's another part of this as it relates to the 1031 exchanges, is that if a couple of these things ultimately get passed together, whether it's elimination of the stepped up basis and a increase in capital gains, is that for some people, and you can see the slide that you have on your screen now shows current capital gains tax rates by state, is that what you're going to pay today, if you'd love to get the cash out, if your kids really don't want the property, is ultimately going to be a lot less than what your kids will pay or what you might pay if you, for whatever reason, just want to get the cash out at a future date. And so for those reasons, we've actually seen more clients consider the cash out option, have us explore, okay, what is exactly going to be the net dollars that I'm going to be able to walk away with? Should I do something? So that aspect of just a sale to access the cash before taxes are significantly increased is a big part of I think what we're starting to see, or what people at least should be considering, is that how much more do I have to make if I own the property for 10 years to just give my kids as much as I could give them now, or to have as much as I want to have to enjoy the rest of my life or whatever. That just a cash out is also something that people should probably be considering.
Well, and Justin, one thing too, if you're worried about a multitude of these laws passing, let's say no step up in basis, increase in capital gain, and elimination of 1031, is you could have a sale of a property today and then find your next property in an opportunity zone and do an opportunity zone deal with your money and buy another piece of real estate, but the sale will create those capital gains for you. You put those capital gains into a self-directed opportunity fund. It's just essentially you buying a property you control yourself, or invest into an opportunity zone deal. I would prefer your own directed fund. And what that'll give you is a delay federally in the payment of those capital gains taxes. So you do get some time value of money paying them 5 years down the road, 6 years down the road. You get a 10% reduction in that tax bill federally. Now, remember, short term, you will still have to pay your California gains next year. But the last part is if you hold the replacement property that you buy for 10 years and you sell it anytime 10 years after you buy it until 2047, you won't pay any step up in basis on the sale. Any profit you make is tax free across the board. So that's another opportunity that really hedges you against almost all of these laws at the same time, if you can find a good opportunity and do it in one shot.
I think the opportunity zone thing, it's gotten off to a much slower start than everybody expected. And then with COVID and some of these other things, becoming the headlines, has been an underutilized opportunity, and I think will become one that's more valued, appreciated, and actively used. I would highly recommend. Jason's done a number of created opportunity zone funds for people, as well as has broad reach into the larger third party offered funds on the opportunity zone side. But one of the things that people, I think, don't really realize or recognize regarding things like the opportunity zone is that the way that the census tracts work, there are a lot of opportunity zones that are in good areas, or really emerging, improving, revitalizing areas across the country. We showed the video for the listing at 2200 South Las Vegas Boulevard, which you would kind of think like the Las Vegas Strip, with how much money goes through that area, could never be part of an opportunity zone. But all 7+ acres of that opportunity is in an opportunity zone. There's some in Costa Mesa. They are all over the place, and in a lot of areas that you might not expect. And as you start to look at some of the offerings that the third-party companies have put together, there are some beautiful product that has been developed in an opportunity zone. And so if you're not familiar with it and you want to explore that, and you want to see the benefits or the tax benefits from investing in an opportunity zone, Jason, myself, or any of our advisors can walk you through the numbers and help you figure that out.
Justin, one thing too to keep in mind on those opportunity zone deals for someone that might want a newer style property, because I know you and I have been doing a lot of newer construction triple net deals. You can buy a property in an opportunity zone pre-C of O, pre-certificate of occupancy, essentially right before the building's completed. And if you buy it with an opportunity fund structure and the correct use of funds, you actually get credit for the upgrades on the property as well. So you can actually buy a property pre-certificate of occupancy, new construction in an opportunity zone, and get credit without having to do the construction or the improvements yourself.
Jason, I think that, I'm going to make a quick comment just about how great of a little idea that is, or a suggestion. And the value of having people that are in this all day, every day, that talk to a lot of people, see a lot of transactions, and the opportunities that we all uncover because this is what we do, and how valuable that can be for an owner. I mean, I will tell everybody on this webinar right now, I didn't know that. But to know that and to have that, available in my toolkit as another option for our clients, is going to end up helping somebody really grow their wealth and do well and have an option that they weren't considering. So, when we encourage you about the opportunities and the things that we think are available today, I would say in most of the meetings that we go on, the things that we're suggesting or the ideas that we're presenting are just things that hadn't crossed people's mind as options. Certainly the next step is, once it's an available option, is to be skeptical that they could do it, or that it's real, or that it's safe, or all those things. But there are a multitude of clients taking advantage of that suggestion that Jason just made, or many of the others that our clients are utilizing to make more money, get a better return on their investment, whatever it may be. We'll come back to the opportunity zones thing in a second. We'll talk. The next one is about the increase on the capital gains tax. Right now you have how it is currently. Take a look at, obviously, California, which is the highest. Can you go back for a second? California, that's the highest, but maybe take a look at some of the other places you may think about investing in and see where they're at today. The income tax-free states of Tennessee, Texas, Florida, South Dakota, Wyoming, Nevada, Washington even, all on there at only 25%, with California being at 33%. We'll go to the next slide. Should capital gains tax increase to what is suggested right now, of the top marginal rate being 43.4, which would be a top rate of 39.6 plus the 3.8% net investment income tax. That, on a federal level, with California's tax on top, would take it to 56.7% in California on the capital gains tax. What this starts to do, especially if we think about the repeal of capital gains or a stepped up basis, is it has a dramatic impact on the performance of properties out of state relative to the performance in California. And when you think about so much tax that would be going, additional tax that would be going in California that you don't pay out of state, it can add up to millions of dollars. We did an analysis today for an owner where it was literally $3 million in additional benefit just avoiding some of the taxes should these things pass, and them owning outside of California versus owning inside of California. Jason, any additional comments you want to talk about capital gains tax increasing?
No, not there, but there was a quick question from Christopher that, yes, Christopher, you're correct. So that's why I said that you would have to pay taxes next year to California if you went into an opportunity zone this year. So California doesn't recognize the capital gains portion of the tax law. Actually, to be honest, California only recognizes one line of the entire federal tax code and nothing else. And they have their own complete tax code because they don't want to follow anything in the federal code. And so short term, you would need to pay your state taxes next year, but you would get the delay in your federal taxes. So just keep that in mind if you're in California specifically.
All right. Maybe what we'll show right now, we're talking a little bit about this and the impacts of what it's going to have. There's a number, I think, of impacts here, but an increase in capital gains tax and the value of having your assets in California. For the longest time, at least that I've been in the business, there's been perception that if you go out of state, you're not going to get the appreciation and you're not going to get the cash flow growth. Last time when we all gathered and we talked about some of the options, I was showing some slides in Colorado Springs, but what you've got on your screen right now is we took a look at, we had our research group put together some information on a variety of properties. The California properties are in orange. There's some industrial in there. There's some apartments throughout Southern California. There's a Nevada property in there, an industrial building, couple Colorado assets that we talked about last time, and then some Texas and Tennessee assets. And what you can see is the annual appreciation, basically during this cycle from 2013 through year to date, the average annual appreciation of a variety of assets. And historically, certainly when I got into the business in 1999 and in the early part of my career, that California assets would appreciate at a significantly higher rate than properties out of state. And whether it's that, let's call it the quality of life and the business climate that drew people to California in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and probably into the 90s has drastically changed over the last few years. And so we're seeing businesses leave, we're seeing a lot of people leave California now, and these areas are appreciating at a very comparable rate to California. The next slide will show you will be rent growth. And so we took a look at these same assets and went, okay, well, are their rents growing at a comparable level to California? And you can see that, the Tennessee assets, a little bit better than all the California ones, the Colorado ones, very comparable from a rent growth standpoint. And so what we're seeing is that these areas that maybe historically didn't appreciate as fast their rents and their values are appreciating on par with California. And our private client investors are the ones that are most taking advantage of the opportunity out of state. It was interesting. For a lot of these properties that I'm showing you here, all those recently closed. Let's call it in the last 4 or 5 months, those transactions closed. And in every case of the out-of-state properties, the seller of the property was an out-of-state entity that had significantly profited from owning the buildings. Lots of them were from California. The Tennessee ones might have been from Texas or Illinois or Washington. But it's private client owners now going out of state because there aren't the litany of paragraphs and subparagraphs in the legislation that make it difficult for ownership. In fact, Mike Alper out of our Tustin office, he and I were in South Carolina last week looking at an upleg property for a client who had owned in Southern California for 45 years, 12 units. They were making decent cash flow, but they were sitting on a ton of equity. And their main goal is to take their equity, redeploy it out of state so that both the husband and the wife can retire and enjoy more cash flow and enjoy their quality of life. Well, in addition to that, the rental agreements that we were reviewing on the plane out there, totally different than the rental agreements that we've got to have today. Just over the last 2 years, I know many of you on this call now use the 20 different documents that Jason has created to be kind of the perfect rental file. The rental agreement there was 2 pages. And to put it as succinctly as possible, if the tenant didn't follow it to the letter, the owner had the ability to get them out, and in a much quicker time frame than what we're experiencing in California. So in addition to the rent growth option, the appreciation now that we're seeing, it's also much easier for an owner, especially a private client owner who's, whether it's enjoying retirement or busy spending all day, every day doing something else, to stay out of trouble in some of these states relative to California. Jason, I know you got a lot of clients that have done that recently. You want to talk about some of their experience and some of their successes with using that as an option? And now when we layer some of these tax consequences on the performance of property, it looks even better for out of state.
I would like to reiterate to you guys that it's not, I think some people are going to see this as doom and gloom, and it's not. It's like an opportunity, right? Because Justin said 2 things earlier while we get into how the deals have worked for clients is, one, interest rates are still at an all-time low. At some point that they will have to go up. As interest rates go up, it affects your ability to repay a loan. So prices may or may not get affected, likely will get affected down. the elimination potentially of 1031 reduces your potential buyer pool as well, or people might be willing to pay bigger numbers because they're in an exchange versus not in an exchange. So this is really now an opportunity, not a time to be scared. It's more of a time to sit down with a planner and advisor and really put together a plan long term for you. Also, things to keep in mind is if you do own out of state, and a lot of our clients are thinking about this, they might not retire in state, right? Or there are, as Justin said, some of the clients are already retired. Well, if your income is out of state and you move out of state, you're great. If your income's still being generated in California and you move out of state, there's a good chance the state of California is going to try to tax you under state of California tax for any income that you generate within the state. So moving your assets outside of California, if you're still living here, won't really affect you now, but it gives you a lot more flexibility in the future, and you're getting better returns and you're getting better transactions. And it doesn't have to be, I know we talk a lot about single tenant triple nets, but even going into apartment buildings, like, we're doing some handful of deals of apartment buildings. People sold apartments here in Southern California and they're buying in Colorado Springs. Justin's been talking about Colorado Springs for a long time, but the deals are fantastic and the tenants are easier. As a landlord, it's easier. The process is better for evictions if people don't pay. But also, most of those buildings have been seeing people pay throughout the pandemic because they're good quality jobs in those areas, and people didn't get laid off because they were needed. So.
Jason, I want to pass along an idea that one of our clients said to us the other day as we were talking about all these things. And, we'd mentioned that there's 4,000 properties on the market because of this. And Jason just also said the flip side of that is that if this is everybody's last chance to do an exchange, there's going to be people that are paying a premium. And one of our clients came to us and said that their plan now, in light of what they think might happen, was to get their property on the market, expose it to all the people that were going to want to do an exchange, before the opportunity gets taken away, get top of the market price because of the urgency to find a property and interest rates. And then they were going to put their money with the accommodator. And if it didn't pass, go on and do their own exchange. But if they thought it was imminent that it would pass, they would just pay the capital gains on it.
Interesting.
And I thought it was really a brilliant strategy to kind of hedge their bets. They don't mind owning property, but if they're going to pay 40% or 56% tax down the road, and they can pay, the current tax, there was money, quote unquote, money to be made there, and there was taking advantage of the appetite and the need to get absolutely top dollar. So that's another idea or strategy that, some of you may think about and go, you know what, that kind of does make sense, or that might be something that I want to do as well to take advantage of what's happening. Basically, an opportunity today to take advantage of.
Well, and Justin, remember too, right? If you do that strategy and you kick it into an exchange and then wait and see, and let's say it doesn't necessarily pass right away, but you think it still might in the future, about 20 days before your 6-month period ends, if you don't love your exchange property, you could always, if you're comfortable with the capital gains potentially, you could always throw it into an opportunity fund and buy yourself another 6 months to acquire a property. You just limit where you can buy it at that point, but you can buy yourself really almost a year of watching at that point to figure it out.
That's another great idea. Let's talk about stepped up basis and some of the things to think about or consider there, and maybe some opportunities related to that. So in the proposed tax plan or tax changes will be a change to stepped up basis. The American Families Plan, while it's light on details, calls for an end to the effects of stepped up basis for gains of $1 million or more for an individual, or $2 million or more for a married couple. So in essence, the tax-free passing of assets to your heirs will no longer happen under the Biden tax plan. How do you think that changes the investment real estate marketplace and what people should be doing?
I mean, if you don't get the stepped up basis, and let's just say you have a really big gain, there's a chance that your heirs will have to sell the property because they can't afford the tax on the difference and they need the proceeds from the sale in order to pay the tax bill. So I think what it will do is it will create a transaction volume that we haven't seen before, or that we haven't seen in a long time, where people are going to be trying to move properties around to raise the basis and buy properties with a higher basis, to transition those to their children sooner rather than later. So buy a building with a much higher basis and go in, and then there's not as big of a step up long term when it's handed over to the children. So I would think that would create a lot of opportunities to purchase additional properties as well if you have the capital to do so. People needing to get out of their deals now.
I think we're going to see a lot of that. They also, I don't know how many of your conversations with your clients center around keeping the current assets that they have and just passing the problem, well, letting the kids get a stepped up basis and then deal with it.
Right.
Without that benefit, and potentially paying, go back to the capital gains tax slide, potentially paying tax on some of these numbers. For somebody who, doesn't love operating real estate and might want to better enjoy the income right now, the need or desire to hold it to avoid that tax is now gone.
Right.
And so what can you do? What can you do better? Whether it's a labor intensive property or it's a building that, doesn't have any garages, or the clear height is only 12 feet. And now every, good industrial building is 18, 22, 24, something like that. Or they have moved out of state, or they've moved out of county. And can you get something that just makes everything better right now, or from an operation standpoint, or can you just get something that makes the income and the return a lot better? I think all options should be on the table.
Justin, one thing that's come up a lot too with the stepped up basis and property values and whatnot is residential homes have gained a substantial amount of value for some people that have held them for 30 or 40 years. And some people are concerned about, the difference in their basis and the value now. And they move out of state, they move somewhere else, and they still hold the home, and they're worried about the taxes. So one thing to keep in mind is in this situation too, and your advisor can help you with this as well, but you can actually take a home if it's no longer your primary residence and rent it out and turn it into an income property, even if it used to be your primary residence. And you actually change it from a personal residence to an income property. And then you can actually exchange eventually those profits out into a different opportunity as well. If you're really worried about just the stepped up basis alone affecting your home and you're not living there anymore and you have the opportunity to rent it out. So.
A couple things as we get into the last 5 minutes of this week's webinar. One, if you got some questions, let's please, we'll try to get to every single one of them. Also, we've got some polls up. If you haven't seen it on the right-hand side of your screen, please check them out, participate in them. It helps us kind of decide the direction of the content as we move forward. But Jason, I'm going to ask you the question that's probably on everybody's mind. And then after you go, I'll be happy to answer as well. Do you think all this stuff's going to pass?
Not as drastic as what they're proposing, but I do think that you will see increases. I don't think I'm struggling a little bit on whether or not I think 1031 exchange elimination will pass, but I think it might pass with a cap. I think that the capital gains rate's going to go up. I don't know how much it's going to go up. The step up in basis, that's pretty good potential there. I think you're going to see a blend of these pass, just not as drastic as where they're at right now. Unless this somehow manages to get dragged out until the end of next year, and the Republican Party manages to flip the House or the Senate where they can block it. I think there will be a strong attempt to try to get this passed, and it will, in order to get it done, it will likely require just some of the rates to be lowered. But I do think that there's a good chance that this gets passed.
I've heard a couple things. One, in a lot of reading and a lot of talking to people, that if any of this stuff gets passed in its current form or some varied form, it is probably not till the fall of this year. So there is certainly plenty of time to act. Personally, I don't think that any of it gets passed in its current form. I think the value of the 1031 exchange for jobs, the economy, and the transaction volume in the industry is too valuable to pass up, and is important to the economy. I tend to agree with Jason. I think that we'll see an increase in the capital gains, and we will also see some form of elimination of stepped up basis. There may be a cap, there may be a little bit more that you get protected than what they're suggesting now. But one of the ways to ultimately get that revenue, if you're going to keep the capital, if you're going to keep the 1031 exchange, is to eliminate the stepped up basis and increase the capital gains tax. That being said, in all of it, whether, as I started this conversation, whether I think it's going to happen or not, I think it's a great opportunity to really consider options in the marketplace today. There's been 3 or 4 ideas that Jason has shared from a management standpoint, but also from a transaction standpoint, and maximizing the return on that invested equity, that are adding to our quiver of things that people can do. We've got a lot of them. We've been sharing a lot of them with clients right now. Is, owners who built a building and now they're going to go out of state, or, inheriting properties, and, people now live someplace else and they want to get out of California because they don't like the legislation or they don't like some of the taxes. There are so many options. And that being said, we're also working with a lot of investors that are more roll up their sleeves, professional operations, more transactionally focused operators of buildings that will still buy in California, that can still make sense of the numbers. This is not a situation where it is a fire sale and everybody's a seller and there are no buyers. In fact, there's a good equilibrium of both in the marketplace today. But if you've owned a building for a while, or if you have a property that isn't the absolute perfect thing to own for the rest of your life, there has never been as good of a reason to look at options and consider what you can do than today. The number of options and different things you can do is greater than I've ever seen. With interest rates where they're at, and the desire to lend capital, it is very advantageous for investors today. And I think all in all, our advisors are always trying to talk about the newest and latest and greatest idea and strategy, to give our owners and investors more things to work with. So if, we'll check and see if there's, let's see, questions. Can Biden just do an executive order and bypass Congress, as presidents in the past have on this?
No.
All right, simple as that.
Justin, Greg asked, is there a cap on the 1031? There's currently no cap. You could 1031 $100 million property if you wanted to, but there is no cap. But one of the things that they've talked about is capping how much of the value you can exchange tax-free. So that's just something that's been discussed.
Yeah, I'm sure that tries to get beaten down. That's at least where some of the negotiation goes. Steve, to answer your question, when are they voting? I've heard the fall is likely after all the discussions and the back and forth and trying to get people on board, to, let's call it, make it easy one way or the other, that it doesn't get voted on until the fall. We answered the cap on the 1031. We answered can't just be an executive order. We definitely will provide the presentation for you to review. And lastly, we maybe glossed over it a little bit, but the question is, well, can it be retroactive? What it'll be? If everybody remembers, the Trump tax changes in 2017 were effective on the day that it was voted on, which I think was December 17th, if I remember correctly. We haven't seen a lot of retroactive, to, let's say, January 1st, 2021. If some of this stuff gets passed, it's more likely that it'll be as of the date of its passing, or a date in the future, usually January 1st of 2022 or a future year. And I do think that if somebody is in the middle of one, there will probably be some provisions made for those people that are currently in an exchange or dealing with some of this other stuff, that there'll be some workaround. With that, we want to thank you all for attending. Jason, again, it's my pleasure to do these with you.
Thank you.
You're always providing our clients with some fantastic content and ideas on things that they should be doing from both an operational standpoint and then an investment standpoint. For those of you that don't have the 20, I think I said 20 documented, it might not be 20, but it's certainly a lot package of what we are calling the perfect rental agreement. I strongly suggest it. I've used it on my buildings over the last year and a half, and it's given us a lot of flexibility and a lot of protection. And I found a lot of value in it, and the clients that have seen it and used it have found it valuable. Also, we've worked with Jason's clients who've set up their own opportunity funds, and that has worked out really well for them. So if you were interested in the opportunity zone, Jason talked about it a lot today and suggested that as an alternative. We can certainly facilitate that conversation and show you what that looks like together. So please take advantage of his service. If any of our advisors can be valuable for you, please give us a call, and thank you for attending, and we'll do this again in a month.
Thanks, everybody.